is that recruiting is a leadership priority, not just an HR priority. It's about 10 years ago, I was speaking to a group at the Engineers Club in St. Louis, Missouri. Those of you who are familiar with St. Louis, it's Central West End. And I was speaking to a group of folks, about 100 people in the room. 99 of them were what I would call seasoned youth, 25 to 32. They're all engineers, otherwise known as prime recruiting grounds if you happen to own an engineering, an engineering firm or a firm that hires lots of engineers. 99 people fit exactly that profile. One guy over here, 55, polished, professional, quietly holding court. I was curious, who is this individual? What's he doing here? So I made sure to go over and introduce myself. Now listen, this is St. Louis, it's not Philly. If it was Philly, you'd go up and say, what are you doing here? In St. Louis, right? In St. Louis, you have to be a little bit more elliptical than that. So I think I probably asked the question of saying, what's the value that you find to participating in this particular forum? But he actually was not elliptical. He looked straight at me and said, Eric, that's very simple. I'm recruiter-in-chief for my business. That was 10 years ago, but that has stuck with me to this day. Recruiter-in-chief for my business. And when I thought about it even years later, I thought, listen, 99 really seasoned engineers in this room. If I thought at that point to ask John, by the way, who are the A players in the room? We have 99 people. Who are the top 9? You think he could have told me? Pretty sure he could have. Now, was he working the room, twisting elbows, passing out business cards, saying, hey, you ought to come work for me? I don't think so. I think what he was doing was developing relationships, making sure that he was on people's radar screen so that, among other reasons, when they were ready to make a move or thinking about their own career development, they were going to come to him. Recruiter-in-chief. That's part of my invitation to you this evening, is what does it look like for you to be a recruiter-in-chief in your business? Let me step back just a moment. I've used this phrase, A player. I have several different definitions of A player. We've got 15 or 20 minutes this evening. I'm not going to go into all of them. I'm going to use this one. An A player employee is someone who can do a particular role better than you can do it. And you absolutely trust that they're going to get it done. You absolutely trust that they're going to get it done. Now just think with me for a moment. And you all are in senior roles. So let's think about your own immediate team. What kind of impact would it have for you to have one more person like that? One more person who could do their particular role better than you could do it, and you never worried about them getting that job done. If you're like most people, that would have a really significant impact. A really significant impact. And many of you work in very large organizations, some of you work in small organizations. Certainly in small and mid-sized, and often in larger organizations. I'm not talking about having to hire 50 people like that. I'm talking about 5. I'm actually talking maybe just about 1. One more A player. Significant impact for you and for the organization. So if you're tracking with me for the moment on this idea of the importance and the impact of hiring even one more A player, and you say, listen, I get it, recruiter-in-chief, then what do you do with that? How do you start to take and roll that emphasis out into the organization? Recruiter-in-chief does not mean infantryman, right? It means you're owning responsibility for it. Otherwise, you're inhaling it to some degree and say, listen, within my span of control, I'm going to be intentional. I'm going to model good recruiting behaviors. I'm going to always be thinking about who's the next A player to bring into my organization. But it means more than that. It means bringing our leadership and management team into this process with us and saying, listen, I've decided that recruiting is a priority, which means now it's not just my problem, it's our problem. We've got to be thinking about this. Now listen, if you run a Fortune 500 company, you may have a whole internal HR department, internal recruiting department, which does not mean, by the way, that you don't need to be highly engaged in the process, but you've got lots of resources at your disposal. But even if you're running a small company, you can start to implement processes here that really are not very expensive, but getting people engaged with you. And here's one of the basic principles. We need to be interviewing all the time. We need to be interviewing people all the time. Let me give you a couple of caveats on that. Interviewing people all the time to me means 2 or 3 times a month you ought to be interviewing someone. Now that interview might be formal. They're literally coming into your office. They have a resume. You have a conversation. You're considering them for an open role. It might be over a drink at a bar when there's no interview per se, but you know what you're doing. You're always scanning the horizon for your next A player. Now you begin to think about this. If you're doing that, and your leaders and managers are doing that, in 12, 18, 24, 36 months, what kind of impact do you think that has on the business? It starts to have an impact. It really does. My client, Fred Kristen, came up with a highly economical way to begin to systematize this within his business. He runs a company called Hallmark Stone. They're kitchen countertop fabricators, a very successful business, a lot of business with Home Depot and the big chains, but also a lot of business with independent retailers. Here's how Fred did it. He said, listen, I've got to make this a priority. So he created an Excel file on the common drive of his company, and he put a sheet together for every department. And he told each department head, every month, I want to see new names on that list. He called it their farm team. Right? We're familiar here with the concept of farm team. Anybody who's is a baseball fan, you know, the Phillies have a team in Reading. The Phillies have a team in the Lehigh Valley. They can pull talent up at a moment's notice. Our businesses need the same thing. Where is your next hire coming from? And often those are not people who work for your organization today. They work for other people's companies today. But tomorrow, they could come and work for you. So if you're tracking with me so far, there's so many more ideas and concepts that we could talk about how to kind of inhale this recruiting emphasis within your organization and take advantage of the culture that you've built. But in just the few minutes that we have left, let me turn our attention away from specifically on the recruiting side, on the finding and hiring. Let's talk a little bit about leading and keeping. How do you lead and keep the A players that you have? My wife and I were out socially. We ran into somebody that I've worked with professionally, but we also know socially. And she was a financial analyst and works in a 400 person department. 400 people. That's a lot of people. And we just got to talking, and I asked her how things were going, you know, personally, professionally, and it came up that she just had her performance review. I said, good for you. How'd you do? She said, fantastic. We use this 9-box performance box rating, if you're familiar with that. And I was in the 9th box. High performance, high potential. It was the highest anyone could be. Awesome, I said. I'm thrilled for you. I'm a curious person. I said, just out of curiosity, how many other people in your department were in that same 9th box? And she said, none. I said, 0? She said, none. I was the only one. I said, wow, that's really interesting. She said, what's so interesting about that? I said, well, listen, it's fantastic for you. I'm thrilled for you. But I have to tell you, 400-person department, 1 person in A player, there's nothing intentional from your manager's perspective. There was nothing intentional about hiring A players. You, my friend, are an accident. And the problem, right? And what's the problem with that organizationally? One of the problems with that organizationally is that often when you put one Great Dane in the midst of 399 Chihuahuas, the Great Dane starts thinking, I think I need a bigger lawn to go run around in. Your Great Dane, your big dog, is at risk. And she stopped, and she smiled, and she said, well, it's kind of interesting you say that because I've started getting my resume together. 6 months later, she was gone. And this was after her boss, her boss's boss, her boss's boss's boss, and I kid you not, company here in Philadelphia, the CEO of this multi-billion-dollar company could not keep her around. Couldn't keep her around. What's my point? Or what's the application of this point to our organizations? It's this. Sometimes we get into a mindset, because we're practical people, right? We're business people. We're going to get things done. We say, look, I've got a couple A players here who just can pull a tremendous amount of weight, load anything on them and they can handle it. That's fine. We're going to have them go. We're going to surround them with the rest of these people. They'll carry their weight. They're going to carry everybody else's weight, and we're going to make it happen. And that's fine for a while. My question to you is, are your big dogs at risk? Because my opinion is we need to be intentional and focused on creating an environment where A players want to stay and work and stay engaged. You all obviously are a fairly select group in that realm, but it is always worth thinking about, right? Because tomorrow is always another day. What am I going to do tomorrow, not just to maintain, but to create an environment that's going to be able to attract and keep more A players? So something to consider. And then let me wrap up with this. With a question. It's going to be rhetorical because we only have 15 or 20 minutes. I'm sure if we had an hour and a half, I'm sure we could have a great conversation about it. How do you turn a B player into an A player? How do you turn a B player into an A player? And for the sake of this particular discussion, let's put aside the A player in waiting. Right? Kind of the young, talented, or maybe not even necessarily young, but they're not seasoned. They have all the abilities. You can see it all. It's all going to happen. 12, 18, 24 months, boom, no problem. Let's put that person aside. Let's focus on, as a former boss of mine used to describe, a solid citizen. Right? Solid citizen. B player, shows up, good work ethic, committed, but just no way they're going to move to that kind of rock star status. How do you turn that person into an A player? Now, there are a range of answers you would give me, but I'll tell you the one way that almost never fails to work. It's almost always successful. You make their job smaller. I worked with an architectural firm once that had an individual just like this. This guy was terrific integrity, worked really hard, and really his fundamental architectural skills were really pretty good. But forget rainmaker and business development. I mean, we're not even talking about that. I mean, if you left him alone in a room with a client for 20 minutes, went out for an extended cup of coffee and a bathroom break and came back, things were going to be going sideways with that company. I mean, it was not good. His people skills, not good. But the principals of this firm were completely committed to keeping him around. And so they said, okay, Jim, here's what we're going to do. We're going to make a job smaller. So all we want you to do, two things. Quality control, because in an architectural firm, error-free drawings are a big deal. Right? You can do a lousy job of business development in architecture. If you have consistently error-free drawings, you're going to have all the work you need, for the most part. And then the second thing that Jim was going to do was mentor younger architects, which is something that was absolutely within his wheelhouse. Boom! We turned him into an A player. Now listen, that principle alone, you could probably think through your organization, you may have one person, let's say, for whom that applies. You think, you know what, I've been killing myself. I love this person, I've been killing myself, maybe for years, to try to make them something that they're not. I got to stop doing that. I got to make their job smaller so they become an A player. Great, let's go do that. And then you think about it for another 5 or 6 seconds and you think, I'll tell you the problem with that. How many times can I actually afford to do that? I can't afford to be making too many more people's jobs smaller. I need people whose jobs I can make bigger. Bigger. That's what we need. And that's one of the reasons why recruiting is a leadership priority. Not just an HR priority, because we need those people. That's the future of our businesses. As I thought about it, and as I interacted with more executives, I thought, no. I'll tell you what the next application of that principle is. And it's the following. That you and I stare ourselves in the mirror, and we ask, am I an A player? I mean, that's the 800-pound gorilla in the room in this talk, right? Am I an A player? I mean, let's talk about everyone else, but am I? And we stare ourselves in the mirror and we ask, am I an A player? Am I behaving like an A player? And often, the answer we have to come back with is no. Not necessarily that we don't have the capacity to be, but if we're honest with ourselves, there are plenty of times, particularly in very senior roles, that what we need to do is make our jobs a little bit smaller. We've got to get more focused on the things that we really do well. Now look, I'm not taking culpability off of me or of you. We just have to take a look at ourselves and take an honest look and say, this is what I'm good at, this is what I'm not, and deal. But for the purposes of this talk, there's another factor involved here, which is what's one of the reasons that you and I may not be acting like A players today. And the scenario goes like this. Because here I am, and I'm in my job, I'm doing my job. I'm also doing a third of this person's job, 25% of that person's job, and I'm worrying about these 7 people's job because they have the ability to get it to about 83.5%. But the rest of the way, all the way home, makes me a little nervous. Right? Are you with me? Yeah, I mean, that's where we live. And I'm going to tell you something, this is where it really comes home to roost personally. Because if you and I do not know how to surround ourselves with A players, then not only does it have an organizational impact, which is the most important thing, it's having a personal impact. I'm not being an A player. And part of the reason that I'm not being an A player is what? It goes back to my initial definition. An A player is somebody that I can delegate these things to and know they're going to get it done. I know they're going to get it done. I can trust they're going to get it done. And part of what that lets me do, at least between meetings and providing accountability, is turn the light off in that room so I can focus the spotlight on what it is that I have to do. And so if you followed with me all full circle here, what you're seeing is, listen, there's an organizational priority for creating a team of A players, having the kind of talent that can execute, but there's also a personal priority. It's both. To be able to focus on recruiting and understand and own and implement the fact that recruiting is a leadership priority. It's not just an HR priority. Thank you. Congratulations. Have a good week.